Hi everyone, all the attendees who have joined in. Hi everyone, this is Saurabh. I'm now going to start my webinar on setting up international sales team. Um on the other line right now is Neel Ghose. Hi Neel, if you could say hi to all our attendees.
Hi Saurabh, hi everyone. Thanks for having me here.
Just a quick introduction of Neel before we start. Neel is currently VP of Sales at CleverTap in the US. And well, he has one huge claim to fame, which is he's the founder of the Robin Hood Army. I'm not quite sure. Some of you might actually be members of the Robin Hood Army. It's a great social service organization. Been making waves across India and a lot of other countries now. How many countries, Neil?
We're in 13 in last count.
13 countries. Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome.
Mm.
Before, while he had founded the Robin Hood Army, he was also VP of International Operations at Zomato, where he was primarily he had the responsibility of setting up international sales teams. Um, I believe Neil, you set up sales teams in Portugal, UK, and Australia. Am I
Yeah.
missing one any country?
No, that's right.
Okay, great, awesome.
Mm.
Um, I thought it'd be a good opportunity to know the sort of lesser known side of Neil, which is, the sales side, because you're typically known more for Robin Hood Army nowadays.
Mm.
Yeah. So I thought it'd be good for all the attendees on this webinar to know a little bit about your experience in setting up
Mm-hmm.
international sales teams. Now, the first thing that you know I want to share with you is that a lot of our audience here, would be either in the early stages of setting up a sales team,
Mm-hmm.
or would have already set up sales team and would be facing challenges. They could be across startups or mature firms, etc.
Right.
So that's just to tell you the demographic of who will be attending this
Sure.
particular webinar. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So off we go, Neil.
Mm.
My first question to you, and this is obviously in chronological order. So I want to know from you, out of curiosity,
Right.
that you had left DE Shaw, right?
Mm-hmm.
And joined Zomato. Now you're coming in from, I guess, a financial associate role. What was the role called?
Yeah, I was an associate in finance.
In finance, right? And
Yeah.
you came to Zomato in a business development and sales role, right? I'm
Right.
sure it must not have been an easy call for you. So what kind of criteria did you use to make that decision of shifting from D Shore to Zomato? Can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Right. So actually, teacher was my first job out of campus, like straight after graduating. So I think we joined at a time where most of us probably didn't know what finance was, but it was just a cool thing to do. So we signed up for the organization. But I think early on, I realized that I really liked the team at DE Show. I really loved working with them. But it was pretty clear that finance is not a passion, or it's not something which really like wakes me up and gets me excited to go to work. And I think if I unpack that a bit, it's a bit about not seeing the output of what you built. So I was basically looking for an opportunity where I can find that and also learn a lot about building a business ground up. And honestly, I think I was what, 22, 23 at that point when I was making that decision. So there was not that much criteria, but I
Mm-hmm.
can probably say that like three broad things which really like tipped the favor and made the decision to come to Zomato. The first thing is the product, like I loved how simple and easy and intuitive the product was even back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And even while browsing the website, I spent a lot of time on the blog, and I read
Okay.
a lot of stuff about like what Dipinder or Pankaj, or even for that matter, you said about
Mm-hmm.
your work, and it gave a very real, vulnerable picture of like how people really think about work in Zomato, which was pretty um, telling, and I wanted to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
My old friend Anand, who's still with Zomato actually right now, he joined a couple of months before I did, and he used to work with me in DE Shaw too. We were roommates from day zero, so he had very strong things to say about the team. And I think the
Mm-hmm.
third thing was like even my first phone interview um, with Pankaj, who's the founder. there was just a lot of humility and clarity of thought in that conversation, and I was like, yeah, I do want to work for this person. I think there's a lot to learn from, and
Mm-hmm.
luckily it was a it was a good decision. So I think those were the three factors which actually made me make that decision. I don't think it was that difficult when I took it because
Mm-hmm.
honestly, it was early days in the career. There was not a lot to lose, but I'm glad I followed my gut and decided to like go for it at an early stage.
Okay, wonderful. I'm sure a lot of us, have been faced with that decision. Maybe not as early as you, but it's
Hmm.
always, a little bit of fear crops up when you're moving in from a sort of an established brand to a startup. There are many fears regarding the product, whether the company will work out or not, or whether you
Right,
like the
right,
role.
right,
And so actually, compliments to you for overcoming that fear and taking a jab. I'm sure it turned out well for you.
right, right. No, I could. Right place, right time.
Wonderful. Okay,
Right.
great. Now, Neil, I'll skip to my second question, which
Sure.
is, once you joined in, what were the key challenges that you faced in the first 3 months? Because, and I'm asking this question because, you've entered a new environment.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, you are transitioning from a non-sales role to a sales role. I'm sure a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people have that kind of story. They're looking to move from a non-sales to a sales role.
Right.
Yeah. What were the kind of top three or four challenges that you faced? If you could elaborate on that for the benefit of the audience.
So I think if I had to go in the depth of this, that could be another 1 hour webinar. There were that many challenges, but I think first things first, like I just learned, or I had to learn rather, at a very early stage to park my ego in a corner and come to work. Uh, like work in Zomato meant getting, as in the first role, which was sales, was basically convincing restaurant owners to use our platform, which not too many people knew back then. And
Mhm,
when you talk to a first-time restaurateur who recently sold his maybe agricultural land in Gurgaon and got into this business, like he, or in, for that matter, she would not care what college I went to, where I worked, who my friends are. For them, it's very simple. Is it,
mhm,
are we adding value to their business? Right? And I
mhm,
think like a lot of things which you take seriously in your life before, like you kind of need to just park that aside and come to work because it doesn't matter to most people you work with. So I think that was a first, and I'm very glad it happened. I think the other thing was that again I was initially selling in Gurgaon and West Delhi, and
mhm.
my Hindi wasn't great, so that didn't help. When
Okay.
it still isn't great, but at least now I confidently speak badly. But so that was something which I had to like get used to very early, like having business conversations or striking a chord with people who might not have the same backgrounds, who might not come from similar worlds, but just like getting on the same page. And
And
I
are you saying this because you were mainly dealing with SMEs who probably didn't speak the language that, are you pointing towards using Hindi or vernacular or local languages and making your pitches in that?
I think you have to use the language or the norms which the customers used to, or what makes them most comfortable. So even if a person speaks perfect English, but they think in Hindi, it probably makes sense to actually like have the conversation in Hindi or Bangla or whatever that might be. So I think
Oh
like
wow.
you have to
Yeah.
put yourself in the shoes of the customer, think how do they think really, and like just make it very easy for them so that they can end up trusting you and trusting your product ultimately. And
Wow.
yeah, I think the other thing is like getting used to no's, like that takes a lot, like it helps you like build a bit of a thick skin, which might not be there right in the beginning. Like sales is that kind of baby where you're always losing more than you're winning, no matter how good you are.
Mhm,
So, and in the beginning, there are a lot of no's. So just getting
mhm.
used to that and
Yeah.
then like going to the next pitch with that same amount of enthusiasm and passion.
Mhm.
That was something which was quite challenging, and I think it took a little getting used to. I think these two
Okay.
or three things were the fundamental things which were the biggest challenges when I moved into a sales role. But I really hope that most people face it at some point in their career because it really like helps give perspective as to what matters and what doesn't.
Yeah, I think it's a very humbling experience, especially if somebody coming from a non-sales background and you're pushed onto the field.
Mm-hmm.
and there, you're facing a lot of rejection, a lot of people saying no, and people thinking, hey, is this what I signed up for? I think it's
Right.
a fairly humbling experience. I also know that it may not be for everyone. Some people might actually want to leave a sales role, but those who stick around, I do believe that that's a great learning for them, and it sticks with them forever. So
As in,
that way I agree, it's a great humbling
the way I think
experience.
about it, like any role right now is probably a lot of sales, whether you're a consultant or a venture capitalist or even in an operations role, you're constantly selling what you want to set out to achieve. So this experience,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's not a long-term one, in my mind is the
Mm-hmm.
necessary one for a lot of people just to like get that perspective as to how to really communicate your thought process and bring people along.
Okay, great, awesome. I'm going to ask you a question regarding this later, but right
So,
now my next question to you
uh
would be, again, coming to the main topic, which is about international sales, right? So
right,
you had set up the overseas markets, especially the sales teams for Zomato in Portugal, UK, and Australia, right?
right.
So I want to focus the next 3 to 4 questions on that. The first question, which I'm sure runs in the mind of every person trying to set up, is around hiring, right?
Right.
Now, that hiring is not a straightforward hiring where you can just go to a job portal and pick up the best people, or ask an agency. I'm sure that can be done as
Mm-hmm.
well.
Mm-hmm.
If
Mm-hmm.
that can be done, please correct me if I'm wrong. Like, if that can be done, nothing like it.
Mm-hmm.
And if not, where does one find these folks? Do you have, like, do you recall, or can you share with our audience what you did and where did you find these first few sales hires?
Right. Right. So, honestly, I've never had the luxury of being in a situation where I can just hire the best profiles on paper. So that's something which
Okay.
I wouldn't even know if that makes more sense because I've never been in that place where I'm like, okay, like these are the best people on resume wise, so let's just like go and reach out to them. I think one
Mm-hmm.
common trend we've seen across most of our markets, and I think like even our experience in Zomato and international sales has kind of evolved from market to market. Like right back in the day, we would just land up and then figure it out, and then uh, make a few tweaks and kind of make a pitch book as to what works.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one thing is that like one common trend is you need people who believe in the vision and product and who
Mm-hmm.
have a kind of point to prove, at a very early stage. And one example of that is, let's say, in Portugal when we went, like it was a new market. No one there really knew what Zomato was, but this was 2014. So the
Mm-hmm.
team, so the country as such was like slowly coming back out of recession, and so there are a lot of like really like talented people who were either in suboptimum jobs or they did not have jobs at all. So for them, they looked at this as an opportunity, which is like a way back into their careers, and they were very emotional and passionate about it, and that actually resulted in Zomato being a very, very strong brand there. So I think in terms of like what are the broad heads you look at, I think like there's no one size fits all answer. You're a salesperson, you need to figure it out. It could be
Mm-hmm.
networking events, it could be startup meets, it could be like
Mm-hmm.
literally stalking your Facebook friends and your LinkedIn profile to see who are your networks there. I do remember that because Zomato was set up by Bain alumni, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the network in Bain actually helped us out in different countries to basically source and find talent. So even if we can't afford people from Bain, they will help us find the right people. So I think like going deeper into your networks and even something as basic as there have been times where like I remember there was one place where we weren't getting talent at all or people who were just out there on the streets willing to go and walk into new restaurants. So there was a time where we
Mm-hmm.
found a lot of these like young students or people who are just out of like graduated out of college who were out
Mm-hmm.
selling magazines in front of in front of like tube stations or metro stations,
Oh, wow.
and we just realized that these people have a lot of grit for doing this like 12 hours a day, and a lot of them, some
Mm-hmm.
of them are actually pretty polished and get a point across. So we went and had a few
Mm-hmm.
conversations with them and asked them, invited them to come for a few interviews. So I think there's no like you have to keep your eyes and ears open. You have to find people who believe in you or believe in the vision and who really want a point to prove and who will look at this as an opportunity and not as just a one-time thing.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that if somebody is just looking to further their career,
Right.
that is not a that's a necessary but not a sufficient condition to sort of hire. You need
Absolutely.
someone who is trying to prove a point in their personal life. If I'm not mistaken, maybe they belong to a sort of a, like in India, we say they belong to a slightly middle class background, or that they're just trying to, they're just driven with a lot of individuality. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think as in it's difficult to filter for that, but I've seen a lot of those cases work out. A lot of folks who might be from not the best or not the most premium colleges or brands, but they're equally smart, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because of the way things are
Okay.
in India, the system is in India, they might not get the opportunities which their smartness deserves. So these people are looking, they're very hungry and they're looking for that one workplace which believes in them and gives them that opportunity. Similarly, I've also seen like conversely, like at one point we're talking about the middle class spectrum, but I've seen people who come from
Mm-hmm.
industrialist family who kind of have
Mm-hmm.
a point to prove because they're like, okay, we don't want it to come across that everything is handed over to us. And I've seen that
Okay.
hunger there too. So I don't think it's necessarily a income level thing, but it's just about does the
Mm-hmm.
person have that fire in their belly to go and prove a point that they can get things done.
Okay. So are you also suggesting that it's okay to sort of employ an agency to get in resumes so that, you have something to start off with, but then once you are going through those resumes, you filter for these kind of traits. Is that what you're saying?
Uh, I think that's a possibility, but in my personal view, I would rather do the first amount of even sourcing and screening within my team or within myself. Just because even if
Mm-hmm.
you go to a resume or even if you go
Mm-hmm.
to an agency and if you like have a conversation, you have to be very clear about like what you want. And I think in early days, when you're in a new market, when you're selling a new product, even you cannot be sure of exactly what is the right fit. So I think
Okay.
unless you go through those pains of like trying
Okay.
out 10 different things out of which you know two or three work, then you're
Hmm.
in a position to tell other people that look, this is exactly the profile I want to need, and once you give it to me, I'll have those conversations. So I think like I would actually avoid outsourcing it at a very early stage. I'd say figure it out, get the
Hmm.
learnings, and then scale after that.
Wow, that's actually a very important point. I think I personally agree with you because,
Hmm.
uh, assuming that you know who you're looking for in an international
Hmm.
market, that could be a very wild assumption.
Right,
Maybe
exactly.
you try out maybe about 50 to 60, I don't know, some X number of interviews to figure out, okay, what's the sort of issues that people talk about, what are their
Hmm.
priorities, and what are the kind of culture that's there in that part of the world, that wherever you're
Hmm.
operating.
Hmm.
I think that's a very very important point. I think thanks for this. I think this is very useful. Neil, what I will do is, before I go on to my next question, I'm going to just launch a small poll for the audience,
Okay,
and I just want to check who all in this in the attendee list are actively involved, or are likely to involved in setting up a international sales team. So this poll is on right now. It's on your screen, and I'm requesting all attendees to quickly put in their responses.
sure.
Okay, so while they are responding to this, I'm going to go on to my next question,
Hmm.
which is about interviewing, right? How is an interviewing in the early days in an international market? How is it different from, how you would typically do it in your headquarters? And while you're at it, also, could you tell your favorite questions or situations that you use to sort of filter out the kind of talent you're looking for?
Right, right. So I think the first caveat to when it comes to hiring is that I think when you're like hiring a team or you're building a team, it is it's actually like the act of interviewing someone is a privilege and it's also an education. Like you can learn a lot from that. So I think I've seen a few cases where it's a very top-down process where you just ask a bunch of questions and you're waiting for the right answers. And I think that doesn't like at one point it's not just you trying to understand whether the person will be a good fit. It's also the person who's interviewing who's trying to gauge you and your culture and figure out whether that's a good fit for their skills. So I think the first thing to note is that it's a two-way process, right?
Hmm.
And if that's the first principle, it just makes it more a conversation than just a interview, so to speak. So when I'm hiring specifically for sales, there are like three buckets I'm largely looking at. One is
Hmm.
probably connect, and I'll go deeper into this point. The second thing
Okay.
is presence of mind and logic, and the
Mm-hmm.
third thing is hunger and resilience, right?
Okay.
Now, connect for me is very key in the sense that it's not like the smoothest person in the room is not a great salesperson necessarily, nor is the most articulate
Mm-hmm.
one. Connect basically, in my mind,
Mm-hmm.
means likability. I might have broken Hindi or broken English or whatever that is, but as long as I can connect with a lot of people in the room and I can strike up a chord and I come across as likable and people want to listen to me, that for me is enough for someone like being for getting into the first rung of being a salesperson. So
Mm-hmm.
like that is something where again like it's not tangible through a question like uh like does this person have this attribute? But I think if you make the person comfortable, if you make it a very conversational interview, then you can basically understand, is this a person where I would want to spend more time just getting to know them, or getting to know like why they do what they do, or just hearing more from them. And I think that's super important in a sales process.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way I would probably gauge presence of mind and logic, and maybe even hunger for that matter, is a bunch of like sales mocks, case studies, and in a lot of cases, challenges which I face in my current role and I don't have answers for, right?
Okay.
So suppose I am scaling a team from like 5 members to like 50 members suddenly, and there are a lot of like
Mm.
operational challenges. It could be with recruiting, it could be with retention, it could be with even like onboarding and training people, like things which
Mm-hmm.
I'm figuring out in my current role. I literally put it out and ask people like, okay, so like, what would you do if you were in my place? And in a lot of cases, I've actually learned stuff which I've incorporated in my day-to-day work. So I think like the best way or the best case study in my mind is things which you go through because you know the pains of it, and
Mm-hmm.
you might actually be exposed to a fresh perspective which can help you with your work. And I think another thing with respect to like when you're again like getting into hunger, resilience, presence of mind, uh, I prefer not going through someone's whole resume and asking them
Mm-hmm.
different questions about their different experiences. I prefer picking up one experience which they're passionate about or something they failed in or whatever, and just going much deeper into that with a lot of
Mm-hmm.
follow-up questions and kind of unpacking the layers. Like it gives a lot of context as to like what is the substance or not of that person if you go like deeper into one question or deeper into one point of view. So that is something like a few things which I keep in mind when I'm going through sales interviews. And I think the another thing is I set the expectation of what the role looks like in a tough day. Like
Okay.
it's very, because we're all salespeople at heart, it's very easy to like glamorize a situation or glamorize where the
Mm.
person is coming into. But when they come in day one and they see it's not what they thought it was, then that's a bad situation for them and that's a bad situation for you and your company. So I think like while it's a fine act of at one point exciting them enough to like be really pumped about coming and joining your team, but at the same time setting the
Mm-hmm.
expectation of what life really looks like, so that at least that's a start of a great working relationship in my mind.
Okay, but while you do that, Neil, that also must mean that you must be having more people walking away from the interview. Probably they get apprehensive or scared.
Yeah, I think that does happen, and I think that's not necessarily a bad outcome, because like as you said, like sales roles are not for everyone, and at the same time there's to take it one level further, like there are different sales roles. It could be an enterprise sales role or an inside sales role or an on the field sales role, and they're all different, and like some things might just not fit into the personal life of someone or like what they want out of a job. So in that case it's just like the best possible scenario to like be as transparent about it as early as possible. So
Mm-hmm.
in that case, if that person works out and if that person likes you, they're probably going to refer people who in their networks or their friend circle who might like the job. But at the same time, it's not a waste of their time and your time in terms of like trying to figure a fit in the working
Mm-hmm.
relationship or at work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, wonderful. And has there been any incident where you've gone against your gut feel and the hire has actually not turned out to work?
Uh, as in, is the question that we went against our gut feel and we hired the
Yeah, you
person and
messed
then
up. we hired the wrong person. Not the person was not fit for the job. I'm saying,
Right.
does it like, going against the gut? How much of a role does that have to play? Have you taken decisions which went against your gut?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's important to like while the gut is important, it
Hmm.
should be like it should still be a very data driven decision as to like why you're hiring that person. So I always make lists which I'm trying to like basically gauge people on, whether it's a case study or it's a personal question or it's their connect, and then I try to evaluate them. And then I'll always make sure that there's someone who's bouncing it off me, so it's not like a one just me hiding and making a decision. Like
Hmm.
there has to be like someone who doesn't think like me or thinks in a different way in the organization, who's also kind of circling in on those points. So I think there are a lot of
Hmm.
cases where your gut will point towards people who tend to be like you, who tend to think like you, but then your biases are kind of like overlooking certain flaws. While in the other case, there might be people who might just not fit the bill of in your head who you think is right, but ends up being a complete rock star. So I think it's important to like call out your own biases while hiring, because otherwise you just hire people like yourself, and that does not lead to a very well-rounded organization at the end of the day.
Oh yeah, talk about dealing with your own devils and biases, because
Mm.
that itself requires a lot of awareness, to be aware that you're not looking for someone like you, and some amount of I don't know, for the lack of a better word, diversity, a person who's different from you. You're okay with having that kind of person in your team, right?
As in, it's good for the team, I believe. Like when that means
It's
there's
good for the
fresh
team. Yeah.
perspectives. People will think about the pitch in different ways. People will think about the product in different ways. Like if we have the same people from the same
Hmm.
school in one room, you're not going to get a lot of new thought ideas. And at one point, especially in an early stage team, you have to keep like trying new things to figure out what is product market fit or sales market fit, whatever that the term might be. So you need a lot of like different thoughts, voices in the room for it to be a successful team.
Wonderful, great. So the next question that I have for you, Neil, is around building a belief in a new sales team, because when you're like that early
Mm-hmm.
into a market, right,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have too many successful case studies, right? As
Right.
in, you still not acquired customers. If you have acquired customers, great, but if you haven't, there's nothing to show to the team, so they can't take a list of customers saying, hey, we've these are our customers, so why don't you hop on board as well?
Right.
In that case, and I remember you had a couple of questions ago, you had said that you need people who already have belief, but I believe that that's in itself a chicken and egg problem, because
So,
there is no proof of concept in that market. How do you
so
tackle that?
right, right. So I think in Zomato, they actually tackled it in I don't know if it was intentional or organic, but there was a actually pretty strong way of tackling it. So basically Zomato is a restaurant discovery platform, and we list every restaurant from a local dhaba to a Taj of a new city. So we have this very rigorous process called data collection, where we physically walk the streets and visit every single restaurant and get on board their information, their menu, their photographs. And then after that, we launch the platform. So a lot of the early state sales team were actually involved in that process of data collection, where it's not hardcore sales, but it's kind of building the product. And what happens is when you put your uh like sweat and toil and like you put that physical effort in basically building
Mhm.
the product and having a say in how it looks, it actually breeds a lot of ownership and evangelism, and no amount of like just smooth articulation can replace that passion which comes when you do that. So I think like to like take that point out and make it applicable across different sectors. I think having early stage teams be a part of like the build of a product or the part of a design, that
Mhm.
would actually like lead to a lot of like evangelism, which will actually help in build belief for them in the product and the thing. And I think the other part is that you need to talk about general wins across other teams, across other markets, and the broad vision which the company is aligning towards. And this can't happen over a PPT session. It can't happen in an organized training. This happens in like water cooler conversations or over a sutta break or on the way to a meeting or back. So it has to be very, very organic and kind of inbuilt in the people who are training or the people who are managing the teams, like to have these conversations. And I think like a combination of these two things of building the product and constantly sharing wins in basic settings, I think these go a long way in building product, in building belief for a new sales team.
Yeah, those are great points. Actually, one of the things that I do believe is, as you know, if you could, and I've heard a lot of co-founders and founders talk about this, that if you involve your new sales team, international sales teams, into some sort of a product feedback session,
Yeah,
and you
exactly.
could also do this in an organized way.
Hmm.
At least they feel that they've been heard, and at the time that they're sort of reviewing the product, they can ask any questions and doubts that they have. In that way, the somebody at the headquarters, maybe a product head or head of sales or marketing, can answer those questions, so that when this salesperson goes into the market, they don't have that many doubts in their head regarding the product. So that
Right.
I definitely agree. I also feel that CXOs can get involved via webinars, etc., to
Hmm.
share success stories from other markets, like you said,
Right.
and make it a more of an organized process. Though you've talked about a lot of emphasis you've given on water cooler conversations and meetings to and fro. So
Absolutely.
basically, the grapevine has to be buzzing with talks about the way the product is winning in other markets. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Exactly, exactly.
Okay.
Right, right. And I do
Okay.
believe like sales
Perfect.
reps are the people who are always on the ground, right? So like when you're doing customer
Hmm.
interviews as a product team, right? Like they would probably be one of your top cohorts to actually engage and ask questions, just because like they probably have maximum access of what people are actually feeling or the way people experience the product on the ground. So it's not even doing it for the
Hmm.
sake of doing it. It will actually like tick off a lot of like KRAs or metrics in the product Steam also to get a real sense of what is happening.
Okay, so you're saying talk more often to new people who've been inducted into the sales team, and keep taking,
Sure.
sort of a voice of the customer or a
Exactly.
NPS from the customer, as in
Exactly.
not customers really, but people who are pitching to, so prospects basically.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay, perfect, perfect.
Mm.
Great, then that's a great one. Okay, Neil, so we're halfway through the webinar, so I
Mhm.
think we're doing good on time.
Sure.
So my next question to you is a little bit about the softer side of things, which is
Mhm.
how do you keep sales teams inspired, and I hate to use the word motivated, but I like to use the word inspired. How do you keep sales teams inspired, and always have that hunger to go every day and do sales, because in the early days sales are far and few to come by, right? It's not very often somebody gets a customer on board.
Right.
In those days, how do you keep team members inspired and motivated?
Right. Right. So I think actually a bit of this links back to the first question or the previous question of hiring. And
Hmm.
I think again, like if you hire naturally for people who are self-motivated, who you believe would be comfortable in ambiguity, and who you can also like set the expectation of what life will look like for the next 6 months. I think that is actually a big part of a sales team being inspired and motivated, because it's at the end of the day, it's not just you as your job as a sales leader to keep people motivated. It's like there needs to be a basic baseline positive vibe within the team. So I think like before like even going into how do you deal with it, like I think the first step is that get hiring right. Like if you get that piece right, uh, this this challenge is much relatively easier to solve. I think in the initial days, especially because the lesser wins, lesser sales, a lot of all of that, I think something which like are my best memories of like setting up in a new place are probably the stories, and like enjoying every part of like not just the wins but also the losses, like kind of like celebrating it. So like I remember there's this time in Zomato London where we were launching, and it was not we didn't really like run away with the product. It wasn't like it wasn't adopted by a lot of people back for months. And at one point, like we were working harder than we've ever had in our lives, and we're trying every possible trick to make something work. But we weren't really succeeding, and there were not a lot of players who were using our product. And even the few clients we had, like there was limited business we were giving them. So there was a time when like I was very very like As in, there's a time when, like, no matter how self-motivated you are, you kind of tend to become are we really like solving something here? Like, what's the next step? And I
Yeah,
just
it's not easy.
yeah, and I just went out, like, and I was out for a random party with non-Zomato people, and someone at 1 a.m. was like, "Oh, I need to find a place to eat right now." And I was about to like explain to him that, "Oh, you know what? Like, oh, there's this app where you can find places to eat around you," and someone beat me to it, and some random person went up to them and said that, "Oh, you should Zomato this," and they kind of used it as a verb, you know. And like, when like after all that struggle, you hear someone using it as a verb, then you like realize that everything is worth it. So just like stories like that,
Mhm.
and like sharing that with the team, and not just you sharing that with the team, encouraging other people to like put out their experiences of what is working and what is not. It builds a positive vibe,
Mm.
and you learn from everyone's collective experiences. So I think like creating that platform where it's very easy for people to like put out what they're experiencing, that itself would like go a long way in keeping people motivated when things are not so easy.
Okay, and do you also support the fact that this can be made formal? Like you could have these on every, let's say, Fridays or Saturdays in a session where you could be sharing this over a 1 hour session?
I think it is. I think it's absolutely possible. I think the way it works is that like it's like po just the way negativity breeds negativity, even like I would say the converse for positivity. So suppose there are five people in a team and each one of them come with one positive story. We go back thinking that okay, there are a lot of places where this product is working. So I think
Hmm.
the more formal it is, the more stories will come out, and that will ultimately lead to more belief.
Got it. So what I'm taking away from this question is that it's really about communicating the win, so that communication channel must never stop, right?
I think so too. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Great.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, this is a slightly generic question, not necessarily related to international sales, but you've been in sales for a very long time now.
Mhm.
Do you have any tips for the audience
Mhm.
around how to build a strong sales culture within the organization? I know it's a very generic question,
Right. Right.
but I get this question a lot, and I'd love to know what a person like you thinks about this.
Right. Right. So I think the number one thing is focus on outputs and outcomes, and not inputs, and through very simple
Hmm.
metrics. So I'm like, whether it's revenue or it's whether it's the way you handle your accounts or whether it's contests, like the 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 nature of all of this should be outcome driven or output driven, because I've seen a lot of cases where it's very easy to start justifying non-performance through saying, oh, but I went to so many meetings, oh, but I spent so many hours on the ground. So I think like
Hmm.
if everyone speaks outcomes as a metric, and very simple metrics, like salespeople are simple, uncomplicated people. They need one or two things to chase. They don't want like 100 things to do. So I think that is one key to like building a strong baseline culture. Secondly, I think it needs to be a very safe place. Like the sales team and the environment. Uh, like this is a situation, like sales is vulnerable. Like you're always going to lose more than you win, and
Hmm.
everyone has their moments of self-doubt. Like even if you've like hit targets for like 10 quarters in a row, in the 11th
Hmm.
quarter you're back to zero. So like, and sales is also like, it's very unforgiving. It's never about your past laurels or what you've done. It's always about
Hmm.
today and the present. So I think like given that it's a very high pressure situation, like people really need to
Hmm.
enjoy it. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense for most people, to like to be part of that. So I think
Hmm.
like like at least for me, like back in the like my first sales team in Zomato, they still happen to be some of my best friends. And yes, we were competitive,
Hmm.
and yes, we were like we were squared off against each other, but we still had each other's back. And knowing that, and like creating that as a leader, is I think a very important part of building a sales culture. And I think lastly, probably most importantly, like just do the right thing. Like sales is probably a path where it's easiest to slip. Like even really small
Hmm.
misalignments of revenue or incentives or anything else could be, it could seem like not a big deal, but the point is like what you're doing is going to send a signal or a precedent for the rest of the team to follow. So I think it's
Hmm.
very, very, very clear. Like it's very, very, very important to know like what is right and what is wrong, and like if someone is like, even you yourself or your team is thinking of something along another line, just to like cut it off in the like at the inception point. So I think like ethics is a big part of like a successful sales team. So it's these three things probably, like focusing on outputs, making
Okay.
it a safe place at work, and doing the right thing.
So, tell me about the safe place bit, right? When you say safe place,
Right.
what are you safeguarding against? What is it that I understand the fact that people are going to have moments of self-doubt and there's likely to be a gloomy situation in an office. Now, what are you
Right.
safeguarding against? What is it that you're protecting yourself against?
No, I think when I talk about safe place, I'm talking about like it should be a place where every single person in the sales team can bring their full personality into work, right? And if you do not feel accepted, or you feel you have to conform to a certain type to be good at the job, that's half the battle lost. So when I say so safe place, I basically mean like it's should be an environment where people can be vulnerable, where they can share failures and successes, so that they ultimately learn from each other, feel comfortable, and then feel confident enough to go to the market and actually like give the best possible representation of the product.
Okay. So by that, do you also imply that they should not be judged for being vulnerable within the office or, expressing themselves?
100%, 100%. I think that's the key actually. Like people
Okay.
should like it's you're never going to have a complete type A organization where everyone is always self-motivated, where everyone is always
Mhm.
performing. People will have their moments of self-doubt. Like make it easy for people to express that, and then move on
Mhm.
and like get back to the job. But I think unless that happens, like those vents happen,
Mhm.
it's not a very sustainable structure.
Okay, I'll hold on to that one as long as those
Mhm.
vents happen, right? Venting is very
Yeah.
important, right? You get the cathartic energy out.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, wonderful. Okay,
Mhm.
this question is again back to the international, sales team bit, and actually
Mhm.
is applicable for a lot more, not just sales. Is
Right.
how do you manage remote teams, right? We often come across in India, there are a large number of entrepreneurs, who are setting up businesses which are across locations. At least they're all in the top 7 to 10 cities minimum,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Now, how do you manage a sales team which is spread across so many locations? Because I'm pretty sure a lot of communication, etc., it's never as good as the headquarters, right? So,
Right.
any tips because you've done that multiple times?
Right. Right. So I think three thumb rules: WhatsApp, WhatsApp, and WhatsApp. So
Okay.
no, but yeah, on a serious note, I think like streamlining your methods of communication, that's the first step. I don't know, in my new workplace, we use Slack a lot, and I think like it's really
Mhm,
good to have very targeted, focused conversations. But like being on the same page as to like how people are going to communicate digitally, that's the first step of it. I think one part of
mhm,
it is it's not just like when you're communicating with people, it's not just like we tend to be very reactive, and it's always about when
mhm,
we respond to numbers or we respond to targets. But there should also be
mhm,
periodic proactive reviews over tools like Zoom or Skype, where we don't just like
mhm,
we're not just looking at things retrospectively, but we're also like looking forward and dissecting what is working and what's not, and coming up with actionable
mhm,
takeaways. So I think that's one
mhm,
big part of communication, so that people feel part of like the planning and not just the execution. And I think
mhm,
having norms, I think that is big. And agreeing on what goals are and the frequency of check-ins. Like I think like this last point, the frequency of check-ins is important. Like it's important to be like, I think I've got this wrong a few times.
mhm,
Where at probably at 10 p.m. at someone's time zone, I'm asking them for a update as to what's happened.
mhm,
And I think like it's important to be culturally sensitive. Like like different people have different cultures. Like it's
mhm,
important to adhere to that and at the same time get your work done. So
mhm,
I think it comes to a point where like suppose you create a great working relationship with someone, or suppose you like go through all the filters, then after that it doesn't become that important. Then it's like they trust you, you trust them. But till that level gets reached, like it's important to be like culturally sensitive about like where they come from and what is their comfort zone, really.
Okay, wonderful. So when you say proactive reviews, you mean to say that you block calendars in advance and just go ahead and review the work anyways,
Yeah,
and don't always respond to month end where targets are met or not.
exactly. And it's not even reviewing their work, it's also like maybe just an open session of people sharing what they believe is working, what is not, and like actually like kind of putting that together as to like okay, like what's the way forward. So it's not just like
Okay.
again, it's not just going to be top down. It's more about like okay, what have we learned in the market and what do we take out from that.
Okay. And do you suggest communicating just with the head of sales of that location, or do you also sort of conduct town halls across, with all the teams sitting in front of a screen?
I think a frequency of interactions with the head of sales would obviously be more, and your touch
Mm-hmm.
points. And again, like it's also a
Mm-hmm.
relationship you're kind of building remotely. So I think like the more you talk, the better it is, at least in the
Mm-hmm.
early days. But I do think like every once in a while, maybe it's monthly or quarterly, it's important for everyone to get a sense, to get a feel of what the company stands for, what the product's roadmap is, and
Mm-hmm.
like what the underlying culture is. So I do think like town halls are very, very beneficial when it comes to that.
Okay. And do you believe personally in connecting individually on a skip level, that is bypassing the head of sales and talking directly to the frontline salespeople one on one?
I think so too. I think it makes a difference. I've seen this firsthand with like folks like you and Pankaj in Zomato, and like you guys would make a lot of effort to like get to know people who don't necessarily report to you. And I started doing that myself, and I think I learned a lot about the organization. Like sometimes like people will only tell you what they want you to know, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just like you just get a better pulse of what's happening in the market when you just over those informal conversations. It's important to again set context with the people who are directly reporting to you, that is it okay if I have these conversations once in a while, because otherwise it might be looked upon as overstepping. But once that's said
Mm-hmm.
and once everyone's on the same page, then I think it's like to know the pulse of an organization, you really need to have a lot of multiple parallel conversations.
Okay, wonderful. Now, I think we're coming into the last 5 minutes of this webinar, after which we're going to throw open and take some questions from
Sure.
the audience.
Sure.
What I would request the attendees is, if you have any questions, you can type it on the question box and we'll take it up after this question. So, Neil, what I really wanted to know from you is, what
Mm-hmm.
you're up to nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, that's one question. The second question that I had was, what are those learnings from, your previous jobs, D Shaw, Zomato, that you have, that, are there any, and specifically from sales, is there any bit of it that's helping you specifically in Robin Hood Army? Because that's a completely different field.
Right. Right. So I'll take the second one first. Like what are we doing? So I think I wouldn't know where to start when I think about the actionables and the processes which we've used in previous in our sales career in Zomato or wherever, which we brought into the Robinhood Army. Like we operate on WhatsApp, we have leaderboards, we have very, very clear metrics which teams are chasing. We have sprint teams which are working on specific projects. We also like use data a lot. So like
Mm-hmm.
just like in food tech, you'll use data to see like what is the life journey of online customer. We're looking at data all the time to see like how many people are coming in the top of the funnel, how many people are coming for their first drive, how many people are signing up, how many people are coming 6 months later, and then we're trying to analyze and dissect like retention patterns around that. So I think like in terms of actionables, even like things like how to pitch to a restaurant, we have mocks on the basis of that. It's run like a growth stage startup, just that
Mm-hmm.
there's no money. And I think we've seen that like I think on a broader level, my takeaway, like which we've learned in sales organizations, is that it's super important to have clarity as to what the common
Mm-hmm.
goal is. So we're very clear in Robinhood Army, like in this year we're going to serve X number of people, and we're going to be in so many cities, and we're going to put so many children into school. And like we're very upfront that this is what the target is, and then we break that out into smaller parts. So I think one is like we put our goals out and we publicly chase them. And the second thing is we try to we try to imbibe a culture where the team is empowered to make decisions, which I've also seen really work well in my workplace.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people in the Robinhood Army, they don't think of it as a central NGO with Delhi or Boston as the headquarters, but they think of it as their own baby. So the very high levels of ownership, which I think again is something which we've learned, like even back in Zomato, we never thought of it as like not our own baby. So I think there are no other things we brought in from Zomato into like building the Robin Hood army and taking it where it is. And
Okay.
I think the second question is like what I'm doing right now. So I think again,
Yeah.
obviously, a lot of time goes in building the Robin Hood army. That's my passion project. That's like the startup I always wanted to do, but and that'll always happen. But I've also joined an early stage tech company called CleverTap, and we
Mm-hmm.
basically provide tools to help consumer tech companies solve for retention. So I'm helping them set up business in the East Coast in the US,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a first for me in the enterprise SaaS space. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of new things to learn, and it's a very technical product. But the team is super helpful, so that always like it's easy to ask those so-called dumb questions and get on board early. So like let's see, hopefully this works out well.
Wonderful. Sure it will, Neil. All the best for your new journey. And
Thank
of
you.
course, we are
Thank
big
you.
fans of Robin Hood Army. What you're doing is great.
Thanks, Aru.
So what we'll do is we'll just take a couple of questions. There are about 10 minutes left for this webinar as per schedule.
Sure.
The first question is from Nimesh Mathur, and
Mm-hmm.
he's asking, when you hired for the new overseas market,
Right.
did you prefer hiring locals over expats, right? And what are the
Right.
pros and cons of doing that?
Right. Right. No, that's a great question, Nimesh, and I think it took us a few years to figure that out. So I think the most sustainable structure is hiring a local team. Again, it depends on
Mm-hmm.
what kind of sales you're looking at. Is it field sales? Is it inside sales? Like, but I think like in the experience I've had, like it makes sense to hire a local team, and but the team will need a lot of support and sometimes and hand holding from a team of experts who kind of done it in other markets. So a
Mm-hmm.
model which I would recommend is like probably hiring the first person or the leader locally, probably getting them back into your local market, training them on the product, training them on processes in the local market, and then going back with them and helping them build their team. So in that way, like the leader will understand what the culture, what the product is inside out in the local market, in the home market, and then they ultimately go and build their own teams. But I do think to make a team sustainable, you need to hire locally.
Okay, and I think what you're trying to say is that's more of a, the dominant role is of the culture here, that people are naturally going to gravitate more towards a local than an expat.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, and then you're saying that you bring the person back to your headquarters for a couple of trips to make sure that they carry some amount of the product culture or the local culture as well.
Exactly. And I think one key thing which we learned again the hard way here, earlier we would hire the team, and afterwards we would hire the sales leader, the local sales leader, and hand over to them, which honestly was not a great practice because it's in sales, it's one of the most difficult things to inherit a team. So you'd rather hire
Mm-hmm.
someone top down and get the right person for the job and then enable them and help them build their own team. That's a much more sustainable structure than handing over a team to someone you hire a year later.
Okay, okay, wonderful, great. Now, Neil, I'm going to combine a question that has been asked by Sushil Madan
Right.
and Anurag Rathi. So
Okay.
Sushil asks, how was your experience in dealing with non-performers remotely? And Anurag asks like the follow-up question to that, which is, what are the tips to initiate performance-related hard chats with team, right?
Right. Right.
So they're asking for some tips on that.
Right, right. So I think again, if you have your communication channels in place, like there wouldn't fundamentally be a difference in the way you deal with non-performance issues remotely or locally. I think like setting those communication channels, whether it's Slack or WhatsApp, and those frequency of check-ins, I think that's the first step. Like if that infrastructure is there, then it makes things easier. In terms of non-performance, I actually, at least in the front line, have a pretty simplistic way of looking at it. Like, I'm like, at first, like, has the product training been at par? Because in a lot of cases, like, we haven't trained people well enough, and then we expect them to actually go and bring in business. And so, like, the first thing I'd probably go deeper into is like, are these guys absolutely trained? because after that it's fair for me to
Mm-hmm.
make an evaluation as to whether it's this is a fit or it's not a fit. But if they're not trained well in the first place, that needs to be like rectified. I think secondly, if that is fine, the framework I look is like I actually look at like, is the person like is it because of lack of skills, or is it because of lack of intent, right? And lack of intent could be just pure laziness. It could be like, yes, I am not meeting my targets, but I'm still not like really stressed about it. I'm not going out in the field and like doubling the number of meetings I'm doing. For a person like that, honestly, like, and like I I try to be as compassionate as I can, but for a person like that, I'm like, I would not be able to invest in someone who does not want to be invested in, right? So if inputs is the problem in non-performance, like it's pretty easy to like just put it out there and say like, look, this is the reason why things are not working, or why you're not hitting your targets. Is it possible for you to like increase the number of meetings you're going to? If it's a more deep-rooted skill issue, then that's a much more complicated problem to solve, because A, you've trained the person, B, they're putting in a great effort, and C, they're still not hitting their numbers. Then you have to probably see that if their enthusiasm and their culture is right, are there places in your organization where you can plug them in? Or if not, it's just like easier for the person to have an honest chat where you can say that they probably would be able to thrive better in another role or in another organization in itself. But having it's important to be honest at every stage. People respect that, and it's very important to be empathetic. Like it's not a top-down conversation again. It's the way you would talk to a peer, but it's just like
Mm-hmm.
having very, very focused, targeted conversations.
Right. So Neil, I think one of the things that Anurag is also trying to ask me, and it's my question, which is that since you are dealing with
Right,
somebody from a different culture, right?
right,
You know, just like we have hard chats, probably with somebody who's from our culture versus somebody from a different culture, how much
right.
adjustment is needed, and are there also any sort of legal, sort of, implications of having a hard conversation?
Right. No, I do think that's a great point. And I think, yes, it is important for you to understand the legal structures of that place inside out before you have that conversation, because some markets are just much more labor friendly or less labor friendly than the others. So it's important to know like the
Mm-hmm.
nuances of that before starting the conversation. But I think in terms of like what the content of the conversation is, I don't think that necessarily needs to change between a lot of cultures.
Right.
At the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
everyone is there for professional reasons, and they will respect it when people put out things transparently. I think what really, really,
Mm-hmm.
really matters, and again, I think I've learned this the hard way, is getting the tone right. Like it is
Okay.
something which, like, anyway, the person is in a vulnerable situation, they're not meeting the numbers, they are in a high pressure situation. If you do not get the tone right in that conversation, and if it's not amiable, if it's not professional, if it's not even understanding, then you're kind of like setting yourself up for failure. So I think like being mindful about that is the most culturally sensitive thing you can do while initiating that chat.
Okay, wonderful. One last question, which actually has already been answered, but I will mention it, which is by Shinara Cover. She is asked, how did you source candidates? Did you hire local agencies? I think in question number three about
Mm-hmm.
hiring, that has already been asked. So I will be sharing a recording of this webinar, Shinara. So you could sort of rewind and go back to question number three and hear Neil's answer. I think his question was, his answer was, in a nutshell, that uh, when he's not averse to hiring agencies. Is that right, Neil? But you
Yeah,
have to
that's
do
correct.
your
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but you have to do your own bit of searching in the beginning using your LinkedIn network, using events, and specifically the networks of the candidates who are already being interviewed.
Right.
So I think with that, we will end this webinar, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of more questions, but I think we're running out of time. This is the last 1 minute.
Right.
First things first, thanks very much, Neil, for taking out the time, right?
Thanks for
And
having me,
all
Saurabh.
the yeah, all the best for your new stint at CleverTap. And again, like I said, you're doing a great job with Robin Hood Army. You're an inspiration for not just people in India, but also outside, right? And it's also, it was great to hear sales tips from the founder of an NGO, which is very rare. right? I thank all the attendees of this webinar for taking out the time and coming in. I will be sharing a recording of this webinar later over YouTube, so stay tuned for that. Any closing thoughts, Neil?
No, I think we covered quite a fair share of the thing. I think thank you so much for having me here. And um, yes, that's about it.
Great. Thanks, Neil. Thanks, Neil, for taking out the time. Thanks, everyone, for attending. Take care. Bye bye. Signing off now.
Take care. Bye bye.